But in terms of, where was I going with this, Gene?
No idea.
No idea. That makes two of us. I'm sure it'll come back to me in a minute, but let me move on to the next trait while I'm waiting for that to process. So we've covered, what, 3 of the 6 or 7 principles?
I think we were talking about wishful thinking.
Oh, yeah. Another way to say is delusional. These people will, just sit there and wonder why. And that's why a lot of the, some of the people I study from, or whose material I really like, they have a real problem with people out there teaching law of attraction. Because they're not selling the complete formula. Because the last part of the formula is the bitterest pill to swallow. You got to take action. And there's a lot more. And Dan Kennedy, you guys know who Dan Kennedy is? I thought maybe you might because you have a business background.
No.
No BS marketing. Probably the ultra guru of all the marketing gurus out there. This guy was an A-list copywriter when most of the people writing copy now were in diapers. But one of the things that he talks about in his course called Influential Writing is a book called Sham, which is about the self-help industry. And he says that they got that book about 80% right, but the one thing that I remember him saying distinctly was, you can't build a business in the self-help industry on the people who actually act on what you do. 80 to 90% of the people who buy your product or service in the self-help industry don't use it. And you can't build a business.
No action.
And they take no action. They equate unwrapping the tapes or the books and putting it in their bookshelf as acting upon the information. The other thing you have to understand, it's sad, but it's a commentary on how the whole industry works. And that's actually with anything, fitness, whatever it is. We're looking for that magic pill, and we can talk about motivations and attitudes. The other thing you understand about, kind of getting off topic, should I talk about this or should I just keep focused on these characteristics?
Sounds good.
We talk about motivation. There's basically, and this isn't something NLP brought out very, very clearly, even though other systems of psychology had it. It was called motivation, or what's it called? Motivation strategies? Propulsion systems. Propulsion systems. I'm going to give you the extremes and understand that most people are some combination of either extreme. You have away from and towards. So if this is our 0 point, this is balanced. The population is roughly divided 50-50. 50% of the people are primarily towards. 50% of the people are primarily away from. Okay? Now, there's a caveat to that from a marketing standpoint. Behaviorally, human beings are hardwired to move away from. What does that mean? In terms of evolution, it is always in our best interests in the wild to move away from uncomfortable circumstances and situations. So, as an outgrowth of that characteristic, we will fight harder to keep the dollar in our pocket than we will to get another dollar. We will experience more pain from losing the dollar in our wallet than the pleasure we will get from getting another one. Another parallel is the reason rich people get rich is because they can delay gratification. Whereas people who tend to stay poor jump at instant gratification. The longer it takes to get something, the less motivated they become, which goes directly to towards and away from and motivation strategies, because the way the dynamics of pain and pleasure work are inverse. What do we mean by that? I've never shown you this, have I?
No, it's fairly, it's fairly well known.
This is probably
in the community.
In the community. Now, if we were to look at momentum, I call this my motivation momentum chart. Or you could think of it in terms of gravity. When people experience pain, their willingness to take action looks like this. Say this is 100% pain. They're taking 100% action here, 0 here. This is directly or inversely proportional to the amount of pain that they're feeling. Now, there's something we call threshold. All right, that's actually David's term. Threshold basically means it's tolerable. What interesting happens is the minute we feel pain, if it's above our threshold, we move away from it as quickly as we can until we reach the second threshold, which is basically it's now tolerable. At which point, movement stops pretty much exponentially until it's tolerable, so we just deal with it. We haven't eliminated it. It's gone to a level where it's no longer forcing us to take action. Pleasure has a different dynamic. Pleasure in general, especially for people who are wealth seekers or who want something, like maybe they're overweight and they want to lose weight. Okay, well they have 100% problem here, but they can be focused on losing the weight or getting healthy. You understand the difference? So what happens is you have the exact reverse dynamic. Getting started, they start with this big burst of enthusiasm, but then the work sets in. They actually have to go to the gym every day. And what happens is it's incrementally slow. The pleasure they get only increases the longer they do it. So most people only get here and they stop. They never get past the painful stage. Remember this? Because going to the gym, if you've been sedentary, hurts. Usually because they start with this burst of enthusiasm, they do too much, too quick, and they burn themselves out, they get sore, they pull a muscle, all of these things. So what you have are two competing pleasure paradigms, or motivation paradigms. But it's gravity. The longer you do this, the more pleasure you start to derive from it. And then what happens is the opposite kicks in. Every time you take a day off, you start to feel it. You start to experience discomfort. How many people who are very, very in their bodies are gym rats? The minute they miss a day at the gym, they're miserable. They invert the paradigm. But that's how we work. So when you're selling a service or something, you have to understand that most people are only going to use your product until the pain is tolerable. They're not going to stick around for the complete eradication of it, unless they're a superior human being and have superlative willpower or desire. They can put off gratification. Make sense? So that's my little segue into understanding the pain-pleasure paradigm and stuff, which is a little bit deeper than what NLP talks about in terms of propulsion systems. That's human nature. Whether you're towards or away from, this is how all human motivation works. Okay. Questions on it?
You okay?
Yeah. Focus on yourself.
You're like me. Whenever I take my wife somewhere, I'm worried she's going to be mad because I'm going to hear about it when I get home. You drove me there. You made me waste my time.
No, actually, I have some points to make to him about it
Oh.
that I thought are very interesting.
Oh, cool.
Me?
Yes.
Oh,
I'm going to make sure I'm home before I know how those always work.
You know how they say when you're someplace, you're both hearing the same thing,
Mhm.
but what you take in
Mhm.
might be
Yeah.
different.
Yes.
Different.
Perception again.
We call that subjective validation.
Yeah.
It's a very cool principle. When I teach my cold reading class,
Mhm.
we talk about stuff like that, which is basically anything you hear, you immediately apply to self based on your own filters and things like that. It's kind of cool. But anyway, getting back to our understanding of the characteristics of lucky people, we just finished extrovert, right? Okay. Let's see, which one do I want to go into? Open-minded. And this one's actually, no pun intended, a no-brainer. Lucky people tend to be more open-minded. Open-minded does not mean so accepting that your brains drop out. It means willing to put their skepticism on a shelf long enough to absorb themselves in the experience, have the result, and make a decision based on it. They have a tendency to be more flexible in their thinking and adaptable, and go with the flow. As a result, these people also tend to be a little bit more relaxed in very fluid, dynamic situations than the average micromanager. By and large, you may have noticed that micromanagers tend not to attract a lot of less than positive luck. It's actually very true because of the way they sort through the reality. They tend to focus on everything that's wrong, and therefore they attract their wavelength is they're sending out signals into the world, the spiritual universe, that only attract similar feelings. Not events, feelings. See, our nervous system doesn't sort for events. It sorts for the feeling, which is the vibration, the energy, and then that energy creates the event that generates and perpetuates the feeling. It goes back to that whole emotional refractory period we were talking about. Remember that another definition of emotion is energy in motion. So any emotional experience we're having has an energetic component to it, and that's what's sending the signals out into the universe and bringing them back to us. If that makes sense. But this is a very important aspect, is lucky people tend to be more easygoing, they tend to be more open-minded, more accepting of new ideas and concepts. Okay? In energetic or spiritual, like Taoist and more Eastern philosophies, they would tend to be more of the void principle, a lot of, and air principles. They're very open to new ideas, new thoughts, going with the flow, not being so rigid. Like our Earth personality would be very rigid, I've done this way for 1,000 years, I'm going to continue to do it this way. So it's an important characteristic. So anytime we can cultivate that, get us out of our own little comfort zones and things like that, we gradually expand what makes us comfortable, and we can continue to become more open to new experiences and new ideas. So,
David, if I may, from a practical standpoint, say for example, you have a goal in mind. There are certain people, like my brother, that he has a goal in mind, and he has this idea that he has this outcome, and it has to be this way. And so when he's just concentrating this way and he gets frustrated because it's not happening, he misses all the other ways it can happen because you're cutting yourself off from other possibilities. Mm-hmm. When you're open-minded in this context and you're flexible, you're saying, this is my goal, whether, if I'm driving to, say, Las Vegas, I can drive straight on the 15, I can move over to the 215, get back on the 15. There's a lot of different ways to get there. I can take a plane, as long as I ultimately reach my destination and I get what I want. Some people only have it in their mind, regardless of what's going on, they could be tearing up the road, they'll still be on that road, because that's the only way they see to get there. And that's, in a practical sense, what that open-mindedness means, is being open to other ways to get there as long as you get to your destination.
Well, actually, it's interesting that you bring that up, because what you actually said is actually more akin to what the psychologists are calling, I call specifically vague, as opposed to the open-mindedness concept. Where in the world according to David, open-mindedness is the willingness to accept and integrate and take part in different activities and new ideas. Specifically vague goes right to outcomes, though, and that's and since you brought that up. Yeah, I know that. So, and since you brought that up, we'll go into that characteristic. I wasn't sure which one to do next, but now you've given me that pathway. That's serendipity. How about that? And keep in mind that there's any order I've given you is strictly the world according to David. These are a constellation of traits. There is no hierarchy. Although the ones I've given you I tend to see as being closer to success-driven traits, and the others become much more abstract, much more global, if that makes any kind of sense. So keep in mind that the hierarchy everybody has these traits. It's the proportions and the dominance of some over the other that vary. So we've talked about open-mindedness, and it goes back to state of mind and willingness. okay, to engage in this kind of thinking, to say, well, I'm not sure about that. Let me go and explore it, rather than say, don't know what it's about, don't care. Can't possibly be relevant. Okay, so an open-mindedness. You were very open-minded in your willingness to come here this evening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and now she's been expanded because of it. But of course, you're lucky people, so obviously it makes perfect sense. So let's get into specifically vague, and this is the one that really screwed me up for years. I'm also a martial artist, in case you guys didn't know that. And one of my very first businesses that I ever had was a martial arts school. And I was completely self-taught in terms of the business side of things. So I had a whole bunch of bad ideas and bad habits that took decades to get over. Some of them I'm still fighting with, but be that as it may. Let's talk about, lucky people tend to be specifically vague. And it goes directly to the outcomes they set. Outcomes and directions. For instance, somebody who is specifically vague, if they're thinking about what they want to do with their lives, we'll use the word anal retentive for lack of a better word, but somebody who is ultra, controlling, will say, I want to be a world-class cardiac surgeon from Harvard University. That's a very specific outcome. Whereas somebody who is specifically vague may be saying something like, I want to become a doctor who helps people. Whose outcome is going to be easier to achieve? Right? And this person may become this. But the self-image, what if they can't get in Harvard? What if they have to go to Yale? Now, this person, in their mind, they're a failure. See how they pigeonhole themselves to the point where if it doesn't match the exact parameters they've set, and generally these people do not have the flexibility. Goes back to mindset. They don't have the flexibility to change. This is what I set when I was 27 years old, just graduating from grad school. 30 years later, it's still the same. But the whole body of experiences, knowledges, and things you've acquired are different. These people are stuck. And then because they sort by exception, as a rule also, they look at all the things that are different from their plan and judge themselves based on it. And that goes back to identity, okay, which we talk about more in attractivation and my identity by design programs. How this manifested first for me was when I first started my martial arts school. I set this income goal that I was going to generate so much money every month from my school. Good goal, right? Have an outcome, have a goal. And by and large, I would make that goal every single month. But it almost never came directly from my martial arts business, all of it. It came from other places, from other projects I was doing. But I would make this amount every month. But because I was so focused on it has to come from my martial arts school, I never qualified myself as being successful. I didn't validate that I was getting the number because I was focused on the exact formula that it had and the mold that it had to fit in order to calibrate success. Well, as a rule, people who are lucky, they work more off bullet points than they do off a schematic, if that makes any kind of sense. So it's open-mindedness and specifically vague are very, very similar, but they're different enough that you have to really understand the dynamics of both of them to really cultivate them. The way I sum it up on my sheet is specifically vague people, lucky people are bullet pointers rather than scripters. And you see this a lot in people who are chronically stuck in a lot of areas of their life. I deal a lot with people who want to be more successful in their dating, romantic, and social life. And we deal a lot with processes of attraction. And one of the things I see time and time again is their ability to calibrate when somebody is in fact attracted to them. If a person does not do a specific thing in a specific sequence in a specific way, they completely miss the fact that this person was generating other attraction cues. And so they interpret that as not being attractive, as not being successful, because they have their way of doing it, and if it doesn't match that specific set of parameters, they invalidate it. So these two, open-mindedness and specifically vague, kind of go hand in hand, because one allows you to be flexible, and the other allows you to perceive things that fall outside of what you would expect. If that makes any kind of sense. And to accept successes on a much broader level than most of us give ourselves credit for. And speaking of give ourselves credit for, that actually brings us to our last characteristic, which blew me away. Lucky people in general are kind to themselves. This is interesting. They tend to recognize that failures are in fact stepping stones, not stumbling blocks. Not barriers that say they can't have something. Make sense? Okay. They tend to be highly resilient people. Mentally and emotionally tough. You know, they'll take a pounding, they'll get up and they'll do it again. There's an old Buddhist saying that goes, to fall 7 times, to rise 8. Life starts from now. It's exactly what we're talking about. It's not about necessarily physical toughness. It's about having that internal intestinal fortitude to dust yourself off and go at it again. You know the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. People who lack specifically vagueness or open-mindedness will tend to do that. They'll pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and do exactly the same thing that burned them the first time. Someone who has a good quality of open-mindedness and specific vagueness will say, okay, that didn't work, let's find something different. Okay? Important distinction. Most successful people, most successful business people have failed at least once. They have at least, most people who have their own business, they had at least one that didn't quite work. Usually a lot more than that, right? Especially if you look at the failure rate of small businesses in this country. But yet we have a disproportionate amount of millionaires in this country too. This is why. They also know, and this is the one that a lot of people have trouble with, but lucky people tend to either do it because they learned it early on, or because they just started doing it from the time they came out of the womb and it just works for them. They know how to let go of the past and move forward. Now, this is a direct connection to one of the very first traits we talked about under extrovert, when we say the extroverted person is outside in the world, they're reaching out to people, whereas the introverted person, the less than lucky person, is inside their own head making up reasons why shit's happening. And usually, that's a factor. They're replaying past failures, all their faults, all their insecurities, all that stuff is being brought up as justifications for why things aren't happening in the external world. You have to understand something about the way your mind actually works. The way your mind is designed is that it must seek to answer any question you give it. Okay? And I will prove that to you to a ridiculous degree right now. A lot of my examples tend to be very nonsensical just to show you how these processes work. You think of all the reasons why the moon is made of green cheese, which is the first one that pops to your head. Notice how your brain's starting to look for an answer. Okay? This is not a rational, logical process. Depending on how you frame the question, will in fact engage certain perceptual filters and beliefs and turn off other ones. So if you're sitting at home asking, why do I always fuck up? Pardon my French. Why is my life such a shit? Unconscious mind sitting back going, oh, what's a list? And guess what it pulls up? All the reasons why. They don't have to be logical. They don't have to be rational. Usually they're not. They're just stuff that happened that you've hung that label on. And because you frame the question that way, that's what your unconscious mind gives you. That's the essence of law of attraction. The quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions that you ask, to a ridiculous degree. But this is how our mind works. We must, the mind must seek to answer any question that you give it. So be very careful of the questions you ask of yourself. Lucky people, because they have identified themselves as lucky for some reason, they tend to be able to let go of the past, brush it off, dust it, and move forward, but they also tend to ask themselves better questions. How can I make this work? You know, I can give you a vivid example back when I first kind of got into this business and I was doing my internet business. If you've been on the internet, you've probably heard of the famous Google slap.
Well, sure. Yeah.
Okay? Well, I was one of the victims of the first Google slap. Overnight, things I was paying 15 and 25 cents a click for went to $5 and $10 a click. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, my wife was starting our clinic, and she had miscalculated her payroll. And she was freaking out. You know, I was trying to help her with her business and keep my business afloat and stuff like that. And I called up my mentor. I've been lucky to have some very good mentors in my life because I have a belief that whenever there's something I need to learn, the best teacher possible will show up. And that's been, because it's a belief, it tends to be true for me more often than not. So I called up my friend Matt. I said, Matt, this is happening. He goes, stop giving me problems, give me solutions. And instantly, it flipped my thinking, because I was focused on the problem. And just that one statement, because his dad he got this by, his dad actually happens to be a general in the United States Army. General Kadish, retired now, but I should probably edit that out. But so Matt, for all his insecurities and other issues, understood the concept of problem solving to a ridiculously powerful degree. He says, "Stop giving me problems, give me solutions." And it was and Matt can be very mellow and not assertive sometimes, but in this case, for some reason, he just out-asserted me and flipped my switch. And before I knew it, I was brainstorming ways to turn things around, and we did. But in that one moment, the quality of the questions I was asking changed everything. So, again, this goes back to the quality of the questions determines the quality of your life. Now, a lot of the questions we ask ourselves we're not conscious of. They're just background things that we do because we don't pay attention. But they're there. And they tend to be habits. Timing themselves.
Yeah, and that's why in NLP, when you're studying with somebody who's good, they emphasize, especially in the therapeutic context. A lot of people, in therapeutic context say, well, why do you feel this way? Well, you're just basically prompting that person to come up with reasons to feel that way. So that you're always cautioned to ask, how can you change this? You ask how questions, not why questions.
Yeah. And the type of questions, especially in NLP, 90% of NLP is really about asking the right question.
95. Information gathering.
Well, this is the world according to David, it's 90.
Well, according to Richard.
I don't give a shit about Richard. This is my show.
Richard created it. So.
Yeah, but I stole it. No, I didn't steal anything. There's times to ask how questions, there's times to ask why questions. But each type of question, the how, the why, the where, the what, will elicit specific categories or types of information. And it's how you put those pieces together and extract the meaningful bits of data from it that make what NLP is so powerful. Most of NLP is actually very, very simple. You just have to get the information to plug in. It's kind of like algebra, if you like math. No, I hate math myself. I got a C in basic math, just so you know. Twice. And they tend to, as a rule, in other words, not only do they just let go of the past, they're. Did I say they brush off successes, move forward? I think I missed that one. They tend to brush off failures, disappointments, and move quickly to the next opportunity. So they're quick to move on. When something doesn't work, okay, that didn't work, next thing, next. But they're smart about it. They have this mechanism that kind of sorts, we go with all those other traits, that kind of sorts for the right opportunity. Because there's thousands of opportunities, but not every one is the right one. And lucky people, as a result, the gestalt of all of these traits tend to be magnetized towards the right opportunities at the right time. Doesn't mean they don't have dogs or things that don't go as far as they could. It just means they're more able to course correct. They tend to be more present-oriented than past. They're more focused on the now. What's going on right now? Where are we going? Not where we've been. Okay. And again, they tend to be, when moments of fortuity come up, they go for it. They don't hesitate. It's kind of like an opportunity, but it goes back more towards, there's an old story that in Kabbalah, they tell a story about Moses and the Red Sea, which is a little bit about faith, but also about the willingness to go forward creating seeming miracles. And this is kind of what it goes to. And the way the story goes is Moses had just led the Israelites out of Egypt. And they came to the banks of the Red Sea, and there was this vast expanse of water, and Pharaoh was coming. And so Moses prayed, and everybody prayed, and God looked down and spoke to Moses and said, "Why are you praying to me? Save yourself. You have the power." And so the Israelites prayed the first day and the second day. Nothing happened. And then on the third day, one small child got up and started walking towards the water. And he walked, or she walked, I don't know if it was, I can't remember if it was a male or female. They walked, and the water came up to their ankles, and they kept walking. And they kept walking, and the water came up to their knees, and they kept walking. And they kept walking, and up to their hips, up to their chest, up to their neck, their chin, mouth. And right when they reached their nose, the sea parted. And the rest of the Israelites fled or moved. But the moral of the story is, besides faith moving mountains and parting the Red Sea, is that when we are determined to go forward no matter what, I call it the universal test. The universe tests our willingness. And when we're willing to go forward no matter what, all of a sudden all the seeming stumbling blocks and all the seeming barriers, they start to dissolve. And it's those fortuitous moments that the lucky person seizes and takes those quantum leaps, so to speak. They're magnetized once again to recognize when those turns of events are happening, and they jump on them. Okay? The aphorism I use in the Will According to David is, the universe bows to the will of a determined mind. On a practical level, that's what this means. It's just being determined to go forward, recognizing those moments where you can take a quantum leap and bypass certain obstacles that you were going to go through anyway if you were going to keep on your course, but just taking that opportunity for the shortcut that you didn't see until you started taking action. Does that make sense? And we all have events. Obviously, the room is full of lucky people, so we have lots of events in our life that meet this criteria. But there's a lot of people who don't, and they're not here tonight for obvious reasons. They kind of self-select. That's why. Tell me who you are. Tell me who your friends are. I'll tell you who you are. I'm betting you're surrounded by a lot of people who have a lot of the similar qualities and characteristics that you have. Those are the kind of people I want to talk to. You know, the other people have to work harder to get here. But that's what earns them the right, the self-esteem, the self-image to be here. Okay? By the way, I hang out with John Assaraf a lot, if you know who he is.
Who?
John Assaraf from The Secret.
Oh, okay.
We move in some of the same circles. And one of the things John likes to say is, you will never outperform or out-earn your self-image. And so one of the ways that you change your self-image is through suffering and effort. And usually the fastest way to eliminate suffering and effort is to take action. And so people have to invest in themselves in order for them to experience that discomfort that they can work through that changes their self-esteem so that they can continue to earn more. And that goes back to the pain, pleasure, motivation principle we talked about. That's why a lot of people can't and won't do it. Because they want something for nothing. They confuse entitlement with deservingness. And there's a very, very big difference. But you will not outperform, you will not out-earn your self-image. So it becomes very, very important that you find ways to build yourself from the inside out. Lucky people tend to have less of a problem with this for obvious reasons. Whether it's because their self-esteem allows them to do that, or whether all of these traits just create that positive history of events that lets them know they're worthy and deserving of it. And again, it's a feedback loop. You can start the process on either end, and as long as you do the steps, you'll get the result. So that's really the last of the key traits that lucky people share. They all have in common. And they're not magic. At least at this level, they're not magic. The synergy of it creates magical effects in our life. Questions? No?
What?
You were interested in this, so what, you must have a
Yeah,
question.
No, not really, not off the top of my head. I'm just trying to think of who you were saying, John.
John Assaraf?
Yeah, I can't recall the name, and that's a secret. All the.
No, he lives here in San Diego.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was trying to think of that.
Very, very rich guy. Very, very successful. Good guy. Women love him. Because he's a good-looking, rich, successful guy. So, before I'm going to run you guys through a brief installation, so to speak. We're going to take a 5-minute break while I run to the restroom and stuff. But before I do that, I want to kind of summarize for you just a little compare and contrast so that you can see how this all works. We're going to do this. There's domain. I mean, that's the area of your life. There is the average person. We won't say unlucky. We'll just say average and then lucky. Okay? So, in the romantic life, I know this doesn't apply to you guys, but what's a comparison? Oh, this is, again, a compare and contrast between what somebody who is average is going for when they're going in for success in romance versus the lucky person. This is kind of funny if you think about it. They have a checklist. You see this on Match.com all the time, don't you? 1, they have to be smart. 2, attractive. And by the way, these examples are simply an example. Your list could be different, but these people actually have a list of characteristics, traits, and qualities that the person must have, or they're not a good candidate. Contrast that with a lucky person who has a tendency to say, well, I don't really have a type. As long as they're a good person, this is the one that always gets me. I'll know it when I see it. Makes it really, really clear. Somebody who tends to be lucky in love has this. Someone who tends to settle, they have this. At work, again with the lists. Need to finish X by X time. Have a team meeting at 12. Home by 6. Okay? Lucky people. I want to try to accomplish 2 major things today. But in my downtime, I should really just turn this into a PowerPoint slide, it'd be easier, but I'm going to explore a few ideas that could help my career or company. See the contrast? Some of these things are obvious, but I have to state them. I'm running out of ink. But that's okay. I have prepared. At work. And that is work. Now, friendships. By the way, can we be lucky only in certain contexts?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of why I'm putting this up there. There are certain people who just, they have romantic partner after romantic partner after romantic partner. Other people are just really successful at work. There may be contextual different identities that they're embracing, different sets of beliefs based on the context. Our goal is to go meta, to be able to do this at a higher level so that it kind of generalizes into every aspect of our life. But in terms of friendships, the average person says, I already have a handful of friends. I don't need or have time for more. The lucky person, I love to make new friends. Even, this is where I think of Jonathan, even if it's goes no further than Facebook, a Facebook friend. We all have tons of these, right? People who friend us for no obvious reason. They're good with that. This is not something I was comfortable with. I'll be honest. People would start friending me out of nowhere on Facebook, and I'm like, I don't know you. And I started going back over my luck, and I said, you know what? Time to cultivate. I have massive amounts of friends now. I get spammed like you wouldn't believe, but every now and then I come across something that's serendipitous. Errands. When it comes to errands and tasks, again, we're back to the list. The average person, they're going to have a laundry list. I need to hit the dry cleaners, the bank, the grocery store. I should be home in time for the game. 1, 2, 3. They run their lives by lists. Lucky person, I have to get these things done. But I'm not going to rush. really know what to expect. Who I'll meet. But I know it will be interesting. What an interesting way to move through the world. When it comes to business meetings, we'll put this up here. I'm meeting with this person to do a deal. Don't need a friend. Need/want a friend. I'm here to close the deal. I'm not thinking of them as a friend or potential partner. In other words, the person you're going to meet is a buying unit. Period, end of story. Which is, by the way, in the self-help industry, that's actually what you're referred to. When you go to these seminars and things, the people in the speaking business, that's actually what they call people, buying units. I'm probably going to get blacklisted now for revealing that, but contrast that with I'll accept a meeting with anyone because you never know. Where it might lead. And this is key. Even if it's 5 years from now. And there you have it. Okay? Some of these I discovered as I was going through this process. I did naturally. Other aspects I had to learn to cultivate. Okay? I have a wife who is textbook this. When she started to adopt more of this outlook, her serendipitous moments increased dramatically. She still has problems recognizing it sometimes, but she's making progress. Doesn't matter where you are on the road as long as you keep traveling it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So sometimes a compare and contrast teaches you and cements stuff in a lot more strongly than just going through each trait individually. A lot of it's because of the way we're neurologically wired. Neurologically, from a marketing standpoint, anytime you want to be more effective and activate somebody's neurology, you need to put contrasts, contrasting images, before and after, those kind of things, in your marketing. And that will stimulate a person's neurology at a much more profound level. Just a little marketing tidbit for you guys out there. Questions before we break and come back and do our integration? No? You guys are really smart.
Smart, just taking it all in and
Covered quite a bit.
really reflecting on a lot of that.
We can, if we go through this, we can start to see in our lives when this was true.
Sounds like Zig Ziglar on the radio, huh?
Yeah, how about it? Isn't Zig remarkably successful?
Yeah.
Because you can get anything in life that you want.
Yeah,
if you just
helping other people get what they want.
Exactly. That's my philosophy.
Yeah.
I teach conversational persuasion and influence, conversational hypnosis. That's our mantra. You're allowed to use any technique you want as long as you help the other person get what they want and they feel good in the process. You know?
Yeah.
That's kind of how we do things. So now, that being said, we're going to take a 5-10 minute break, come back, and then if you guys want to, not mandatory, I'll run you through a little guided imagery, and we'll start to kind of amplify these things for you. Okay?
Sounds
Great.
good.
Thank you.
Where's the hot dogs?